the previous segment, we saw the centrality of empires to human history. Most humans, in the last 2,000 years, they lived in empires. And much of human culture, even today, or especially today, is the product of empires. Empires were particularly central to the process of uniting the whole world into a single historical unit. Because of their ability to conquer different peoples and territories and rule them inside a single political system. In this segment, we will take a closer look at the history of empires. We'll try to see when and how the first empire emerged and how did the imperial idea spread around the entire world, and how empires became such important players in the theater of history. The first empire, as far as we know, the first empire about which we have definitive information was the Akkadian Empire of Sargon the Great, or Sargon the Conqueror, which was established around 2250 BC. Sargon began his career as a king of a small city-state called Kish in southern Mesopotamia, what is today southern Iraq. During his lifetime, Sargon, who was obviously a very able military commander and political leader, he managed within a few decades to conquer not only all the other Mesopotamian city-states, and there are dozens of such city-states in Mesopotamia at the time, but he also managed to conquer large territories outside Mesopotamia. Sargon boasted, and we have text in which he makes these boasts, Sargon boasted that he conquered the entire world. In reality, of course, he didn't conquer the entire world. He didn't conquer Japan and Australia. But his empire was still pretty big for that time. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf, where is today Kuwait and southern Iraq, up to the Mediterranean, and it included most of modern Iraq and Syria, along with some chunks from modern Iran and Turkey. This first empire in history, the Akkadian Empire, it didn't last very long. Soon after Sargon himself died, the empire collapsed, but Sargon left behind him, and this Akkadian Empire left behind a new idea and a new dream. The imperial dream, the dream to conquer the entire world, to unite the entire world under a single king or a single government. And this dream ignited the imagination of numerous rulers and kings and conquerors and governments many years after Sargon. For the next 1,700 years after Sargon, until the middle of the first millennium BC, many Assyrian kings and Babylonian kings and Hittite kings and so forth, they adopted Sargon as their role model, and they too wanted to conquer the entire world, and very often they boasted, again in their writings, that they conquered the whole world, even though obviously it wasn't true. But this was a major ideal in Mesopotamian and Middle Eastern political thinking for close to 2,000 years after Sargon, to conquer the whole world. And then, around 500 BC, came Cyrus the Great of Persia, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, and he had an even more ambitious dream. He had an even more impressive boast than conquering the whole world. The kings of Assyria, they always remained kings of Assyria. Even when they claimed to rule the whole world, it was obvious to them and to everybody else that they are doing it for the benefit of Assyria. Cyrus the Great of Persia, he came along with a new ideal. He claimed not merely to conquer and rule the whole world, but he claimed that he is doing it for the sake of all people, not just of the Persian. The great new idea of Kairos was to say, we are conquering you for your own benefit, not for our benefit. We are doing it for you. Kairos did not see himself as the king of Persia, as a Persian king who is ruling over other people, like the Babylonians or the Aramaic or the Egyptians. He saw himself as the king of all humans, not just Persians, who is responsible for the welfare and prosperity of all humans. And this presumption to rule the entire world for the benefit of all humans, this was a very startling, even a natural presumption for somebody to have. Because as we saw in a previous lesson, evolution has made Homo sapiens, like all other social animals, a xenophobic creature. Sapiens instinctively divide humanity, divide its own species, into two parts. There is we and they, everybody else. We are people like you and me who share the same language and religion and customs. They, on the other hand, are other people who are not even people, who are hardly even humans. In order to understand the depth of the natural sapiens xenophobia, dislike, hatred of stranger, take for example the case of the Dinka. The Dinka are people, a group of people who live in the area of Sudan. Do you know what the word Dinka means in the language of the Dinka people? It simply means people. According to Dinka language and culture, people who are not Dinka, they are not people. They are something else. Now, the worst enemies of the Dinkas, they are called the Nur, a different group of people in the Sudan called the Nur. Now, what do you think that the word Nur means in Nur language? It means genuine people. According to the way the Nur see it, people who are not Nur, who are not one of us, they are not genuine people. They are some counterfeit or imitation or something worse than us. Now, thousands of kilometers away from the deserts of Sudan, if you go to the icelands of Alaska and northeastern Siberia, you can meet there a group of people which is called the Yupiks. Now, do you know what the word Yupik means in the Yupik language? I think by now you can guess. Yupik in Yupik language means real people. Again, people who are not us, people who are not Yupik, they are not real people. So this is how most people in history, before the rise of the big empires, treated other people. The basic conception was there is us, we are real people. Other people, our enemies, our neighbors, the barbarians, they are not really people, they are something else. In contrast, once you have this, in contrast to this ethnic exclusiveness, there is us and everybody else is not human, here comes along Kairos the Great of Persia with a new imperial ideology which is characterized by being inclusive and all-encompassing. Kairos sees the whole of humankind as a single group. Everybody belongs to it. There is no one outside it. And my task as king of the world is not to take care just of my people, the Persians. My task is to take care of all people, of all humanity. Now, even though imperial ideology was not always egalitarian, it very often was hierarchical. It emphasized the racial and cultural differences between the ruling elite and all the subject conquered people. Still, imperial ideology from Kairos the Great onwards at least recognized the basic unity of the entire world, and its ideal was that there should be a single set of principles that will govern all people everywhere in all times. And also another central ideal of this imperialism since Kairos was that all human beings have mutual responsibilities between them. In imperial ideology, humankind is usually seen as some kind of big family. There are parents and children. The parents, the ruling elite, they have all kinds of privileges, but these privileges go hand in hand with responsibility for the welfare of the children, of all the conquered subjects people. This new and startling imperial vision, it began with, at least in the Middle East, with Kairos and the Persians, but from them it moved on. It was adopted by Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic kings, which came after the Persians, which conquered the Persian Empire. It was adopted by the Roman emperors, by the Muslim caliphs, by the rulers of India, and eventually it came down to us in the late modern age, when you have the Soviet Empire and the American Empire behaving, at least claiming to behave, in accordance with this ideal. Now, this benevolent imperial vision of the empire as something that takes care of the well-being of all people, this benevolent imperial vision has justified the existence of empires for more than 2,000 years, and it not only objected to any attempts by subject people to rebel against the empire, but it also objected to any attempt by independent peoples to resist imperial expansion. If the empire is like parents that take care of all the people in the world, so anybody who resists the empire is resisting the good of humankind. This was a central portion of imperial ideology. Now, similar imperial visions were developed independently of the Persian model in other parts of the world. Kairos the Great and his successors were not the only ones who came up with this brilliant idea, let's conquer the whole world for the benefit of all people. The same idea, you can find it arising in different times in China, in Central America, in the Andean region of South America, and in several other places in the world. Now, empires with such universal aspirations have played a decisive part in uniting the many, many small cultures of humankind into fewer and fewer big cultures and eventually into a single global system. Because under the rule of empire, ideas, people, goods, technology, they can spread much more easily within an empire than when they have to cross many borders between all kinds of tiny states and city-states and tribes and so forth. So this is how the empires, one of the ways in which the empires helped unite mankind is simply they made it easier for ideas and for technology and for people themselves to move around. Very often, the empires not only made it easier, but they deliberately spread a single package of ideas and institutions and customs and norms over larger and larger territories in which they ruled. One reason why the empires deliberately spread a single package of ideas and behavior patterns is simply to make it easier for themselves to rule all these territories. It is difficult to rule an empire in which every little district has its own set of laws, its own different language, its own different kind of money, and so forth. It's much easier when everybody speaks the same language and use the same norms and values. But a second reason why empires actively spread a common culture over all the territories in which they ruled was in order to gain legitimacy. As we said a few minutes ago, at least since the days of the Persian Empire of Cyrus the Great, empires have justified their actions, whether it's waging wars or building cities and roads, as necessary actions for the spread of a superior culture over the world, a superior culture from which everybody, including the conquered people, would benefit. So they had to do it. In order to justify themselves, the empire actively spread a particular culture which it saw as the best culture, as the supreme culture of the world. And most imperial elites, they earnestly believed that by spreading this imperial culture, they were working for the welfare of humankind, for the welfare of all the inhabitants of the empire. Obviously, they also gain a lot of power and privileges, but most imperial elites really thought that their culture is the best in the world and that they have a mission to spread it. For example, in China, the ruling class of the Chinese empire thought that all the neighbors of China and all the conquered people within China, they are miserable barbarians, and it was the duty of the Chinese empire to bring the benefits of the best culture in the world, the Han Chinese Empire, to these miserable barbarians. The mandate to control, to rule the world was given by the gods, by heaven, to the Chinese emperor, not in order to enjoy himself and not in order to exploit the world, but in order to educate humanity. This was the central ideal of the Chinese empire. You find exactly the same thing in ancient Rome. The Romans also, they justified their dominion over what they thought to be the whole world, the Mediterranean zone, by arguing that they, the Romans, are bringing the benefits of justice, of peace, and of good culture with all the theaters and amphitheaters and so forth to all these barbarians in Gaul and Spain and Britain and Germany and so forth. The Muslim caliphs also argued that they conquer the world not for their own enjoyment, but because they received a divine command to spread the good revelations of Islam to the entire world. So they did it because they really believed in it. The same thing with the Spanish and Portuguese empires in the early modern era. They claimed that they are conquering, say, America, not to enrich themselves, but to spread Christianity. And they spread Christianity. In the 19th century, the British, the biggest empire in history, they claimed that their empire was aimed not to enrich Britain, but to spread the twin gospels of liberalism and free trade. And they did indeed try to spread these two ideas and practices of liberalism and free trade all over the world. And we find the same thing in the 20th century. We have the Soviet Empire that claimed that its mission in history was to spread equality and socialism around the world. And even today, there are many Americans who maintain that the government of the United States has a moral, ethical imperative to bring to third world countries, to barbarians, the benefits of democracy and human rights, even if this means using cruise missiles and F-16s in order to deliver these wonderful goods of democracy and human rights. Now, all these claims that we are conquering you for your benefit, not in order to enrich ourselves, obviously they involve and they involved in throughout history a lot of hypocrisy. But in many cases, the imperial elite really believed in its mission, and in many cases, the empire indeed succeeded in imposing their culture and their view of the world on the subject people. Sometimes this went so far that it led to the breakdown of the separation between the ruling elite and the subject people. Once the subject people accepted the culture and the language and the religion and the behavior patterns of the ruling elite of the empire, there was no longer much difference between them, and the barrier collapsed, and they basically merged with one another. And when this happened, then there were no longer conquerors and conquered, a division between an elite and the subject people, but they all united to form a single people or a single culture. One famous example of this process, which it's not a quick process, it takes centuries, but when an empire rules for centuries, it can succeed. So one famous example of this process is what happened with the Roman Empire. Rome ruled the lands around the Mediterranean Sea for centuries. And after centuries of Roman rule, most of the people which the empire conquered, they were granted Roman citizenship, they were considered Romans, they began to speak Latin. In North Africa, in Spain, in what is today France, they began to speak Latin instead of their old languages, local languages. People from all over the empire could occupy the top ranks in the Roman military and in the civil bureaucracy. Eventually, even the Roman emperors themselves increasingly came from the provinces, from conquered people, and not from the old Roman elite. For example, there are many examples, I'll just give a few. Emperor Septimius Severus, one of the most important emperors and powerful emperors of Rome, Septimius Severus, he came from Libya, from a Punic family, a family which descended from the Carthaginians, the people of Hannibal, against which the Romans fought in the 2nd century BC and the 3rd century BC. Another emperor, Emperor Algebalus, was Syrian. Another emperor, Emperor Philip, he was nicknamed Philip the Arab because he was from an Arab family, but still he was a Roman because there was no problem in the late Roman Empire for an Arab to be also a Roman, and he became emperor. The empire's new citizens, all these new Romans, they adopted Roman imperial culture with such zest that for centuries and even millennia after the Roman Empire collapsed, the subject people were now no longer part of the Roman Empire, they still continued to uphold and to develop the imperial culture. Take, for example, Spain or the Iberian Peninsula in general. It took Rome centuries of very hard and cruel fighting to conquer Spain and to put down all the rebellions of the local population against Roman rule. But look at Spain today. It's been 1,500 years since the fall of the Roman Empire in Spain. And the people in Spain, they still speak the language of the Roman Empire with some modifications. They speak Spanish. Spanish is a Latin dialect. It descends from the language of the Roman Empire. Similarly, the Spanish today, they use the Latin alphabet, the alphabet of the Roman conquerors. Most Spaniards today, they are Roman Catholics. They adhere to the religion of the late Roman Empire, which even today conducts much of its business in Latin. Latin is still the sacred language of the Roman Catholic religion, and the center of the Roman Catholic religion is still in Rome. So 1,500 years after the rule of Rome in Spain collapsed, most Spaniards still believe and still uphold the culture of the Roman Empire, even if it is a bit modified. Spanish law today is based on Roman law. Spanish art, Spanish architecture, Spanish cuisine, they all owe a very huge debt to the legacies of the Roman Empire. A similar process occurred in the Middle East with the Arab Empire. When the Arab Empire was established in the middle of the 7th century AD, it was at first based on a very sharp division between the ruling elite of Arab Muslims and the subjugated populations of Egyptians and Syrians and Iranians and Berbers who were neither Arabs nor Muslims. Now, over the centuries, what happened is that many of the subjects of the Muslim Arab Empire, they gradually adopted the Muslim faith, they adopted the Arabic language, and they adopted the imperial culture of this Arab empire. At first, the old Arab elite was quite hostile to these developments and to the new converts because it feared of losing its unique status in the empire and its unique identity. So when all these Egyptians and Mesopotamians and Iran, they came and said, we are also Arabs, we are also Muslims, the old elite that came out of the Arabian Peninsula, it wasn't very glad to accept these claims and to share power with all these newcomers. Because naturally, it feared losing its position and also losing its unique status and identity. So at first, the Arab elite did not welcome all these new converts. But over the centuries, all the frustrated converts to Islam and to the Arabic culture, they clamored, they demanded to have an equal share within the empire and inside the world of Islam, and eventually they got their way. Egyptians and Syrians and Mesopotamians, they were increasingly seen, not only by themselves, but by everybody else, as being Arab, just like the original conquerors from Arabia, from the Arabian Peninsula. And the Arabs, in their turn, whether it's the authentic Arabs from Arabia or the newly created Arabs from Egypt and Syria and Mesopotamia, all of them came to be increasingly dominated by non-Arab Muslims, in particular by Iranians and Turks and Berbers who adopted the Muslim religion and culture but not the Arab language. The great success of the Arab imperial project, and the Arab imperial project is one of the most successful imperial projects ever in history. Its success is that the imperial culture that was created back in the 7th, 8th, 9th century AD was adopted to such an extent by so many different people that continued to uphold it and develop it and spread it, that even after the empire collapsed, the culture of the empire and the religion of the empire and the language of the empire just gained more and more strength and continued to spread around the world. So this is the success of the Arab imperial project. We find something similar happening in China. The Chinese imperial project also gained immense success. For more than 2,000 years, the Chinese empire conquered gradually numerous ethnic and cultural groups which were initially seen by the Chinese as barbarians, but they were successfully integrated into the culture of Imperial China, and they eventually became Han Chinese. Han Chinese are called Han Chinese after the Han Empire that ruled China from around 200 BC to around 200 AD. The ultimate achievement of the Chinese Empire is that even though it is still alive and kicking, China still exists today, it is hard to see it as an empire except in the outlying regions of Tibet and Xinjiang. More than 90% of the population of China are seen by themselves and by others as Han Chinese. They adopted the identity and the culture of the empire to such an extent that we can no longer really see it as an empire, as an elite ruling over a different people. We can similarly understand the process of decolonization that happened in the world in the last few decades according to a similar pattern. During the modern era, Europeans from Europe, they conquered much of planet Earth, claiming that they are doing it in order to spread a superior Western culture. Now, the Europeans were so successful in spreading their cultures that today billions of people have adopted significant parts of that culture. Indians, Africans, Arabs, and Chinese learned French and English and Spanish. They began to believe in human rights. They began to believe, Indians and Africans and so forth, they began to believe in the principle of self-determination. They began to adopt Western ideologies such as liberalism, capitalism, communism, feminism, nationalism. These are all ideologies that emerged, were invented in modern Europe. And today, billions of people who are not Europeans, that were conquered by Europeans, they also believe in these European ideologies. During the 20th centuries, local groups of people in Africa and Asia and other places that adopted Western values began to claim equality with their European conquerors in the name of the very same values that the Europeans themselves spread around the world. Many anti-colonial struggles in, say, India or Africa were waged in the name of principles like self-determination, human rights, and socialism, which are all Western principles, Western legacies. The same thing that happened with the Arab Empire, that Egyptians and Syrians adopted and adapted the Imperial Arab culture and Arab language and religion. So today we have Indians and Africans and Chinese and Arabs and so forth that have accepted much of the imperial culture of the former Western conquerors, and they don't keep it exactly as it is. They change it in accordance with their own needs and traditions and so forth, but still they are basically adhering to the culture and ideologies and ideas of their conquerors. This is why it is very problematic to argue that empires are purely evil, because empires are responsible not only for the unification of humankind, but also for much of our culture today all around the world. Indeed, the very values that prompt many people to criticize empires, values like human rights and democracy and self-determination, these very values were spread around the world by the empires, by the European empires. They weren't there originally. So how should we react to this dilemma of how to treat empires? On the one hand, yes, empires did horrible things and caused death and war and genocide and exploitation on a gigantic scale. On the other hand, our culture today, even the very values which we use in order to criticize genocide and enslavement and empire, they are all the product of empires. So how to deal with this dilemma? We'll try to answer this question in the next segment of this lesson.